All right. So in today's video, we're going to talk about guidelines around assurance service, not assurance advisory services. They both start with A, but we're going to talk about guidelines around advisory services for internal audit. Okay. And this tends to be one of the biggest questions that I get asked often from audit leaders. We talk about it quite often in the Audit Leader Forum as well. Things like, well, how much advisory work should I do versus how much assurance work should I do? What type of advisory services are okay for me to provide? Which ones are not? Okay, and so I just want to go through today because actually I had somebody on social media reach out to me and ask me this question as well. And it's one of those where some questions I get asked, I can't just respond back with a sentence or two. And this is one. So, it's kind of a learning for everybody that if you have questions for me and you send to me, sometimes I'll record a live video to answer it. And so that's what I'm doing today, because I think answering it in a video is going to be much better for this person to understand. Okay. And so again, that's just a reminder. If you have questions about internal audit, if you're an audit leader and have questions, send me a message through LinkedIn. That's primarily where I'm at on social media, but you can send me a message there, and there may be a future video answering the question if I can't just respond quickly. So advisory services, okay. And so again, for those of you that are not familiar, but internal audit usually provides assurance work or audit work, but they can also do advisory or consulting work as well for organizations. And so people use the different terms. I'm going to probably say advisory or consulting. I might mix the two words around. It's the same thing. Okay, different people just use different words. So let's kind of jump in, some questions that you should ask yourself if you have this question, right? Because you have to, first off, have the right context and know some information about the context of your organization to be able to answer and know what is best for you. Because what's right for you might not be right for a different company. Okay. So I'm going to give that kind of caveat to begin with. And I'm not here to tell people what to do. I'm just here to kind of give you some guidelines if you have this question as well. Okay. So the first question that you probably should ask yourself is, do we follow Institute of Internal Auditors standards? Do we follow the IIA standards? Okay, either you follow the standards or you don't follow standards. Okay, and you may choose to follow some of them and not others. But if your answer is no, I'm not following standards, the answer is really simple and quick. It is, you can do whatever you want to do, right? So whatever advisory work you feel like you need to do, whatever advisory work that your executives or board are asking you to do, feel free to do it, because there's really no guidelines or standards that you're supposed to follow if you're not following the IIA standards. So do what's best for you, for your team, for your organization. Okay, that's the simple answer. If you're not following standards, you can do whatever you want in advisory services. Now, if you are following the standards, then here are some different things that you should consider. Okay, because even though clearly the IIA says that you're allowed, their members, people who are certified through them, are supposed to follow code of ethics. They're supposed to follow the standards that the IIA puts out there. And so again, you'll need to, get in and make sure that you understand the standards and what the expectations are. And if you're not familiar with them, you can download them and read them. There's also some courses over on C-Risk Academy that kind of walk through and explain to you what the standards require. So that's another resource if you want to do that. And I'll just put the banner up there real quick. So you can find those courses over at ondemand.criskacademy.com if you're interested in that. Okay. Now, so let's get back to that. So if you're following the standards, here are some things that you should consider. Okay. Primarily, at least my opinion is, primarily internal audit is primarily an assurance service, but there is a lot of value if you can provide advisory services to your organization. There's value in both, but most executives, most people in the company are going to see or perceive that you're more valuable if you're helping them to be able to solve some of the problems that they have. And those are often done with advisory work or consulting work. Okay. But some things to consider, right? Again, kind of from a standards and from a code of ethics standpoint, from the IIA, you're supposed to remain objective. And so to remain objective, it means that you cannot be in the place of management, meaning you should not be making management decisions. And this is one of those things where a lot of people in internal audit kind of cross the line and they don't even realize that they're crossing the line related to that. And we'll probably get into that a little bit more. But so the idea is you need to remain objective. And so a lot of people, when they're looking at advisory work, sometimes, when you're doing consulting or advisory work, you're making suggestions. You're making suggestions for how things should be. You're helping to set up processes or controls. And so as a result of that, decisions need to be made, right? Ultimately, somebody has to decide this is the way we're going to do it. And so the idea is, if you're following the standards and you want to remain objective, you can provide suggestions, but you should probably not be the one who makes the decision. Okay. And so what that could look like is, and this is where often internal auditors cross the line and they don't realize it. If your recommendations say, manager, you have to do things different, you have to do it this way, you need to implement our recommendation and do it this way. Well, if that's the way you're saying it, you're not really giving that person a choice. You've already made the decision for them, and you're just expecting them to do what you're asking them to do. That puts you in the place of management of already having kind of made the decision, at least in my opinion. Now, other people may disagree with that. And so I chose not to do recommendations that way. Instead, it was, you could do it this way, you could do it that way, maybe give 2 or 3 different options. Management, which way would you like to do it? Okay. And when we do that, it puts that decision back on management. So, like I said, that's true even when you're doing an assurance project. If your recommendations or findings are really telling them what to do, you're really crossing that objectivity line and you're acting as management. And again, my opinion, you should not do that. According to the standards, you probably shouldn't do that either. But with that said, I see internal auditors doing that all the time. And then they can't understand why management pushes back on their recommendations, because effectively you're telling them what to do instead of allowing them to make the decision by providing options to them. Okay. And so, like I said, that's in assurance work, but that can also come into play on the advisory work. If you're the group that's actually telling them how things have to be, you're kind of giving up some of that objectivity and you're becoming management at that point by making the decision. So if you're going to do advisory work, it's best to, again, provide options and have whoever is the responsible manager in that area be the one who makes the decision as to exactly what's going to happen. Okay. So that's one thing to consider is, whenever you're doing advisory work, you want to maintain the objectivity. That's one way to do it. Okay. Another issue that people run into often, and this is going to depend on the size of your group, but typically, if this is going to be an area that you're going to want to audit eventually, it's best if you have a different person do the advisory work than the person who's going to come in later and do the assurance work, because having it split between the two different people allows more objectivity at that point. Okay. And so if there's certain of your team members that are better at advisory work, maybe give them the advisory work, have others on your team come back and do the assurance work. Now, with that, there are some kind of rules of thumb a little bit, which says if you go in and you do an advisory project, you probably should wait 12 months before you do assurance work. That helps, again, to distance yourself a little bit from the work that's done. And again, that's if only one person is doing both. And I know, a lot of internal audit groups only have a few people. I think something like 80% of internal audit is 6 people or less. And so the reality is some of the people who are doing assurance might be the ones who are doing the advisory work. And if that same person maybe helped on an advisory project, you would want, if they're going to be the one doing the assurance, you want them to probably wait a year or so before they would go in and do the assurance work. Now, one issue that comes up often is if you're going back later to do the assurance work and you maybe decide that, well, we put it together a year ago and now we think we should do things different. So you start making recommendations. A lot of times the client will say, well, now just a minute, you told us to do it that way, or you helped us to implement it that way. Why are you telling me something different now? And, again, sometimes that's just because things have changed in that year. But just realize that if you've done some assurance or advisory work and then go back to do assurance work, you may have some people question you on that if you're making recommendations. Okay. Now, some people will say, well, I can't do any advisory work. I'm only going to do assurance work because I don't want to jeopardize my objectivity. If that's the way you want to be, that's the way you can be. I have not found that helpful because when people in your organization are asking you for help and you choose not to give them that help, it shows that you're not a team player and it damages the relationship. So I think it's better to actually do the advisory work and maybe either forego doing assurance work or make sure somebody else does it, or that you're doing it, a year or two later so that you can maintain some of that objectivity. Okay. So that's a little bit of some of the guidelines. And again, the standards get into it in more detail that you can go back and look at and decide what's best for you. There's some, supplemental guidance to kind of help you in various situations. But let's just talk a little bit about some of the types of services that you can provide. Because we were actually, talking about that yesterday in the Audit Leader Forum. And if you're an audit leader and that is something, if you'd like to talk with other people that are audit leaders as well, one of the things that I run is the Audit Leader Forum. And so you can find out more information at bit.ly/audit leader. I put it up there on the screen right now. Where, again, we get together, it depends on your membership level, but it's either quarterly, monthly, or twice a month, where we have calls with audit leaders who are members of the forum. And we go through and talk about some of these exact kinds of things that I'm talking about today. Because as I said, advisory services is one that a lot of people talk about. So as an example, sometimes people are curious, hey, am I doing enough advisory work? Am I doing too much? What percentage should I be? Should I be 80% advisory and 20%, 80% assurance? See, they both start with A. 80% assurance and 20% advisory. Should I be 50-50? What's the right mix? And the answer to that question is, it just depends on your organization. For some organizations, maybe 100% of the work that internal audit does is compliance, assurance, audit kind of related work. And that's fine. If that's what's best for your organization, that's where you should be. I suggest, if possible, you should be doing some advisory work, because that advisory work is typically seen as much more valuable to members of management than the assurance work is. It's kind of like, oh, that's assurance, that's compliance stuff. We have to do that. Okay, that's part of your job. It's a necessary evil. But when we come in and we do a consulting project or an advisory project and actually help somebody in your executive management solve a problem, they see that as much more valuable. And again, I would too if I were the executive. It's like, if I've got a problem and you come help me with that problem, I'm going to see you as more valuable. And so that's why I always suggest that, you should be doing some of this consulting or advisory work. But how much should you do? Is it 20%, 30%, 50%? That's going to depend on the relationship that you have with your board, with your executive leaders, and it depends on really what their expectations are. So the audit departments that are really seen as trusted advisors, I'm going to talk more about that in some upcoming videos, so hang on for that. But those that are truly seen as trusted advisors are typically doing more advisory and consulting work, because again, that's what your management team actually sees as value. You still got to do the other audit work, but whatever projects you can do from an advisory and consulting standpoint, they're going to see that as much more valuable. Okay, so that's one of the questions is, well, how much advisory should I do? It's going to depend, right? And again, I can give you some guidelines here on this video, but that's one of the things that I do in coaching audit leaders, in talking in the Audit Leader Forum, is we get more specifics about individual companies and teams, and can provide more tailored advice based on the context of that particular person. So, again, there's some guidelines. I would say that you probably should be doing some advisory work. Does it need to be 10%, 20%? Those are probably good numbers to start with. If you're doing 50-50, that's okay as well. If that's what your management team and your board wants you to do. I mean, you could be doing 80% advisory work if that's what they want you to do, right? So that's part of the context there. Now, again, if you're following the standards, right, you just want to be careful about some of the objectivity issues on who you're having staff each of those projects, and whether or not you're going to do assurance. Now, again, my opinion is, I would prefer to do only advisory work and forego doing assurance work in certain areas if that's really what your organization needs. So as an example, when I started as chief audit executive at one of my companies, I went in and was trying to figure out what areas should we audit. And I found out very quickly that a lot of the processes in that particular organization were either not there or were very immature. which meant, I could go audit something, but I knew there was going to be a whole bunch of issues. So we could have gone and done the audits and told everybody that you're wrong, these things need to be improved. Or I could spend my time in consulting and advising to help set up and mature some of these processes. So then later we could come back and do the audit work. I chose to do that option. I realized that, again, because a lot of the things were not there, it was a better use of our team's effort to help to develop some of these processes and have things in place that later we could end up auditing. And so for the first few years that I was there, we did a lot more advisory work than we did assurance work because we were helping to set the foundation. Right. And so that included areas around ethics and compliance, around risk management, about some of the accounting and finance processes as well, because I saw it as a better use of our time, something that would be more valuable to my organization if we focused on those areas first. And so that's what I chose to do. Other audit leaders may have mature, established processes where they can do more assurance work at the beginning, and that's fine too, right? You have to, again, understand the context of your organization to know what is best for your organization. Okay. So again, kind of some guidelines. If you're on with me live, I know that, if you have questions as I'm talking, you can type in the comments. There's a little bit of a delay, but I'll be checking comments as well, because if people have questions who are listening live, we can maybe get to them in this video as well. Okay. So that's some of the basic things about guidelines around advisory services. Okay. Some other areas that people have questions on is, well, what types of things can I do? Well, it really depends. Okay. And again, for those of you that have had me in training or that I've coached, you know that that's often the answer that I give is it depends. So what does it depend on? Well, again, if we go back to standards, and even if you're not following the standards, you should consider this, is, are you competent to do the work? Okay, because again, that kind of goes back to the code of ethics, that we need to be competent in what we're doing. Now, competence doesn't mean that we're an expert in everything, but can we competently help? Can we learn what we need to learn for that particular project so we have the competence on that project? Or do we need to maybe bring in someone from the outside who has more competence in that particular area, right? Again, decision that you're going to have to make. So, as an example, I'll just give some scenarios off the top of my head. Let's say that, management is really struggling with this new marketing campaign, marketing and ad campaign for a new product rollout. And they would really like some help with that. Well, for most internal auditors, that's probably not an area that you're very competent in. You may or you may not, but most people in internal audit are not competent in marketing, in product development, in product rollout. And so that's probably an area where maybe I wouldn't suggest that you do some sort of consulting project because you're not competent in doing that. Now, maybe you can hire somebody, or maybe there are some people on your team who have a lot of marketing expertise. And so as a head of audit, you might say, well, I think we meet the competency requirements, so we can go ahead and do that project. Fine. I think most audit leaders would say, yeah, we're not really qualified. We're not really competent to do that. Okay. So most people probably wouldn't do that. Now, let's say somebody comes in, and says, hey, I really need some help. There is, we're having a revenue recognition issue in this part of our business, we're just not being able to track revenues properly, or the controls around this finance process are not working. Can you come in and help us get them fixed? Okay, so are you competent to do that work? Most people in internal audit would probably be competent to do that work because you have an understanding of risks, of controls, of accounting and finance systems. And so that would probably be a project where, okay, we're probably competent in doing that, so we can do a project in that area. Okay, kind of get the idea of the differences there. Are you competent? Is somebody on your team competent to do it? Can you bring in somebody from the outside to help you to shore up that competence? And if you can, sure, go ahead, do that project, right? But don't go to a project that you have no idea about, because that's actually, first off, it doesn't follow the code of ethics. Second off, you're going to end up looking stupid to people in your organization if you don't know what you're talking about. Okay. So what are some other types of advisory projects that internal audit often gets included in? So certain IT project implementations. So new ERP system, new whatever system, often internal audit will be involved, maybe on the team, or at least in going and having follow-up discussions and kind of knowing what's going on, in providing guidance, in asking questions, when there's decision points that need to be made, in actually, helping to provide some, feedback on things that management should consider as they're implementing that IT process or IT software or system. That's pretty common for internal auditors to do that, or to have somebody from your team assigned to that. Some other areas, we were actually talking about this yesterday in the Audit Leader Forum, is around project management, a PMO function, some of those things. Again, we should be pretty good at project management, because that's in theory what we're doing, right? We're managing a bunch of audit projects. And so we're probably competent in being able to provide some help and assistance in those areas. And so again, that's one that sometimes you'll see, people end up doing. If an area of the business is trying to improve controls, and change the processes around, again, a lot of time internal auditors do have process and control knowledge, and so that's often an area where internal audit helps. Sometimes it could be from maybe a compliance or a regulatory standpoint, that you're trying to improve compliance with a particular law or regulation. And again, often we're pretty good at doing that. And so again, those are the types of projects that often you will see internal audit performing as well. Okay. So I know I'm coming up on kind of the half hour, so I'm going to end up, shutting off here pretty quick. If you have any comments or questions, put them through. If you're watching this later and you have comments or questions, reach out to me or put comments below. But just like I said, I wanted to talk today a little bit more about guidelines around advisory services, because a lot of audit leaders ask me this. And as I said at the beginning, I had somebody on social media ask me about this. So here's kind of an answer for them as well. But, advisory services are an important part of internal audit. And I think if you're not at least considering or doing some advisory work, you should probably stop and ask the question, why not? Because often, as I said before, these advisory projects typically provide more value to management than a lot of the assurance work we do. So if you want to be seen as a trusted advisor, if you want to be seen as somebody who's adding value to your organization, probably a pretty good idea to do more of the projects that management actually sees as being valuable. Okay. Again, you got to balance the audit work with the advisory work as well. But again, hope that answers questions. If there's more questions, leave comments below or reach out to me and I'll do another video. So with that, have a great rest of your day and we will see you on the next video.